Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. We are ready to start our international webinar entitled Museums as Sites of Citizenship. The organizers of this webinar are as follows: the National Memorial Complex of the Revolution of Dignity and the Maidan Museum. And we are doing it in cooperation with our international partners, including the European Burgerland Center. So I would like to pass the floor to the co-moderator and co-organizer of this event, Ms. Irina Sabor. She's the head of the school education section within the European Burgerland Center. Thank you very much, Lisa. I would like to start with some technical issues. If you are with us on Zoom, please pick the relevant language if you require interpretation, English or Ukrainian. This event will be recorded in both English and Ukrainian, and we will have the video recordings posted on the websites of the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity and the European Burgerland Center. I would like to point out that our webinar will last for 1.5 hours, and we will do everything within our capacity to make it within this time frame. So a big request to all the speakers: 3 minutes for welcome remarks and 10 minutes for your presentation. And our discussions will last from 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how much time we have left. If necessary, we might extend this time frame just a little bit for responding to any additional questions. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them on Facebook, on YouTube, and here on Zoom. We have our colleagues from the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity and European Burgerland Center. They will be monitoring all the chats, and they will definitely collect your inputs, questions. So hopefully you will receive responses. I guess that's it with regard to technical issues. We are very delighted to welcome you at this webinar entitled Museums as Sites of Citizenship. During this discussion, together with museum experts from Ukraine, Poland, and Norway, we would like to discuss some of the challenges for citizenship education faced by European museums. And another goal is to outline potential areas of cooperation in the future. So our today's webinar is our initial attempt of collaboration between the European Wergeland Center in Norway, the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews Poland in Warsaw, and the 22nd of July Center in Oslo, Norway. We really hope that my colleague and I will cope well with our role of co-moderators, and hopefully this event will be of avid interest not only to museum experts, but also to all educators in Europe, because we want to build bridges between the two domains. Thank you, Irena. I would like to remind all the participants of our webinar about the format of our event. So we have a number of key speakers. They will make their brief presentations up to 10 minutes. And this will be followed by a short discussion by our discussants. They are part of the agenda. They are also present here. Should you have any questions, you can write them down in chats. And if we have some time left at the very end of the webinar, we will also have another dedicated Q&A session. So do not worry, we will definitely monitor your questions and comments, and we will do everything possible to have them articulated. And we will start our webinar with some welcome remarks from the key co-organizers of this event. It's a great pleasure of mine to give the floor to the Director General of the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity, PhD, Mr. Ihor Poshevailo. Ihor, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much to our Norwegian and Polish partners and our Ukrainian partners alike for having joined this important webinar, for having contributed to this critical webinar. The topic is crucial indeed, especially it's pertinent for Ukraine in times of the ongoing war. Museums are serving as special platforms for education, platforms for memory preservation and history rethinking. Museums are also employed as platforms by responsible younger generations. Our museum was established following the Maidan and the Revolution of Dignity. And we know that Maidan is a very unique space. It's a space for education. So basically, we had the university on the Maidan. We had multiple educational activities. And we tried to mount this revolution not only by revolutionary actions, but also by dint of education, by dint of memory preservation and discussions of complex issues. We all represent educational or museum institutions, and we are being convinced that museums are not really the temples of arts anymore. That, usually we perceive museums as holders of artifacts. But now we need to use museums for dialogue, for education, informal education in the first place. According to statistics, the role of museums in citizenship education is paramount. So this issue is relevant indeed for Ukraine, how we can transform Soviet or partially Soviet museums into genuine, authentic museums where visitors will be able to seek and find answers to important issues that were brushed under the rug for centuries and centuries. How museums can become places for complex discussions. How can museums be turned into institutions where we will be able to articulate delicate issues and receive important answers. So thank you very much to everyone who has contributed to the organization of this webinar. We definitely need to craft some methodological tools and resources because they are of the utmost importance to our regional and local museums. I mean, we have a multitude of museums in our regions that were deprived of their buildings and facilities because of shellings and missile strikes, but they continue playing an important role in their local communities. We have another project that pertains to memory preservation and the role of museums in this regard. So I really hope that this is something that we will be able to do within this important international project. Thank you everyone once again, and I really hope that we will have a fruitful workshop. Thank you, Ihor. Thank you for these nice welcome remarks. We're also hopeful that our discussion today will be a starting point for dialogue between our diverse institutions. And I fully concur with you that we definitely need to engage in these important discussions about how we can create new museum spaces in Ukraine and how we can establish fruitful cooperation between our museum and European museums. And now I would like to give the floor to Anna Perron-Fjellstad from the European Wergeland Center. It's a center in Oslo that engages in democracy, education, and human rights. And the main areas of activity include youth participation, combating hatred speech, countering bullying and discrimination. It's all about digital citizenship and a flurry of other activities. In Ukraine, the European Wergeland Center has been operating since 2013 as part of the Democratic School program. Within this program, the center has already made a significant contribution to the democratization of preschool and school education. When the full-scale invasion erupted, we've been working a lot to support Ukraine from Norway, and Anna will touch upon one important focus area for all of us, which is the use of museums as sites of citizenship. And she will also say a couple of words about our activities in Ukraine. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Irina, and welcome all participants, experts, guests. We are living difficult times. Conflicts and uncertainties are affecting our societies, young and adults alike. Our democracies are facing numerous challenges. And institutions such as ours, such as my own center, the European Vergeland Center, institutions who are working to strengthen democracy and human rights through education, we have a very clear role. I think, in fact, we must rethink the work we do, how we work, in order to address these challenges. And yes, as Igor said, in Europe, after 10 months into the full-scale war, museums and cultural institutions are facing the need to reshape their work with young people. And for us, we see educational programs at museums as extremely important to facilitate critical yet sensitive reflection on society, on history, on cultural heritage, on national memory, and of course, on identity. So there is this fantastic possibilities for museums to be inclusive and participatory spaces that are critical for young people to learn how to deal with controversial issues in the present as well as in the past, how to foster inclusive dialogue in society, and how to transform painful experiences into constructive actions to rebuild the local communities. And I'm very thankful to our partners at the Museum of the Revolution of Dignity in Kiev and the Museum of the History of the Polish Jews in Warsaw, as well as our long-term partner in Norway, the 22nd of July Center, for being here with us to be part of these discussions. Our center is 15 years old this year. We have been partnering with institutions across Europe to empower educators and young people to be active agents in their communities. We really believed in the power of education to address the most urgent issues in our societies. And our partners are coming from both formal and non-formal sectors. With the Poly Museum, we have been partners for more than 10 years already, working to supporting them from the very establishment on how to develop their educational programs to addressing young people. With the 22nd of July Center, is the same. We have been working with you since the establishment, and we have a major national program in Norway since 2017. And then is the work for us in Ukraine. As Irina mentioned, we have been working with the Ministry of Education and other partners in Ukraine for the last 10 years, supporting the new Ukrainian school, the comprehensive systemic reform of the whole Ukrainian education system. We have been, for us, our focus has been on democratization of schools. Schools as a place where students lived and learned democracy from a very young age. And lately, the last 2-3 years, we have been working also with kindergartens, because democracy needs to be learned and lived from very early age in life. And we have a network of more than 400 schools working with us. And the last 3 years, we have had about 120,000 teachers in Ukraine taking our courses. This is almost 25% of all teachers of Ukraine. Now, I think, and we hope, that we will be able to do more to link together, to build bridges between museums and schools in Ukraine. And thank you to the Museum of the Revolution of Dignity in Kiev to be with us and to be willing to explore this way ahead. So let's begin the discussion. Let's share our views on how and the challenges for citizenship educations at museums across different partners in Europe. And I'm really looking forward to hear from you, from educators, from museums. Where do you see your priorities? How can we strengthen international cooperation? How we can learn from each other? What do you need? and what we all together can do in the time ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for these nice welcome remarks. Indeed, we invested a lot of work to prepare this workshop and hash out some of the issues that you, Anna, highlighted in your welcome remarks, how we can transform this painful experience into constructive actions, into the upbringing of future citizens, representatives of new Ukraine. We have some common challenges in Norway and Poland. It's essential for museums to facilitate this dialogue, to cultivate tolerance and critical thinking competences. And this will be the focus and the centerpiece of our discussion. We will also talk about how we can overcome our societal trauma. We will hear a presentation from Lesa Oneshko. She's the academic secretary and she represents the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity. Lesa, thank you very much for having agreed to make this presentation on a crucial topic. It will be our delight to be exposed to your experience, to your perspective and viewpoints of all the issues in question. Irina, thank you very much indeed. We all work with complex history. We have brought together educators and museum experts here, people who research and work with complex and vaccine issues. Can I have my presentation on the screen, please? I would like to start with some theoretical issues, and then I will segue into more practical aspects that reflect my experience of working at the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity. On this slide, you can see a photograph of our museum, and most importantly, you can see our team, because any museum is about people in the first place. The Museum of the Revolution of Dignity is a unique museum indeed, because it was initiated by the grassroots. It was initiated from the bottom. How did it all start for us? From a theoretical perspective, according to the definition of the International Council of Museums, a museum is an institution that serves a society and its development. And to this end, a museum collects, processes, and popularizes mankind's heritage. So from this perspective, a museum should be a polyphonic and dialogue-based space that facilitates democratic development. But considering the ongoing challenges of the war, museums should not only preserve artifacts for the sake of its society, but museums should also collect and protect both tangible and non-tangible values and memories for future generations. Because this way we can have an impact on the upbringing of the new generations. We can guarantee equal rights and access to the accumulated heritage. So basically, I read out the definition of the concept museum. And if we're talking about this definition, then basically it correlates directly to the current tendencies in the museum sector, especially with memory trauma. So there are different types of memory trauma, but one of the categories is the trauma that is caused by some calamities or catastrophes. Can I have the next slide on the screen, please? Still the next slide, please. These catastrophes include wars like the current war raging in Ukraine, deportations, mass killings. In the context of Ukraine, catastrophes also include political reprisals, Holodomor, and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Cultural trauma is a consequence of this or that catastrophe. And if you want to recover from this trauma, you need to process it. As the deceased Ihor Kozlovsky wrote, you need to transform trauma into a constructive experience. And this is the role of museums, especially those museums that work with complex trauma. They can help our societies overcome this complex trauma. Both Ihor and Anna alluded to this in their welcome remarks. Nowadays, museums are perceived in a completely different manner. Museums approach their activities in a different way, and they do their best to establish a constructive dialogue with their audience and to have their audience actively engaged. The next slide, please. Still the next one. The Museum of the Revolution of Dignity is a museum of complex history. As part of our activities, we are doing everything within our capacity to work with a very challenging topic, the topic of mass protest movements, with focus on the revolution of dignity. Within our activities, we try to rethink the acquired experience. We're also looking actively for new approaches in order to democratize our society and have an impact on the dissemination of the idea of democracy among Ukrainian citizens in the first place. The Museum of the Revolution of Dignity is an extremely interesting museum. The next slide, please. It's interesting because it was initiated and established in the midst of revolutionary events in December 2013, when the Revolution of Dignity was still ongoing. The initiators of the present Museum of the Revolution of Dignity included the protesters, the participants of the Revolution of Dignity, and the latter included multiple museum experts. They would gather on the Maidan, and they realized that they were bearing witness to historic events, and they did everything possible to have them documented, to have them captured. So in the midst of the Revolution of Dignity, they had already embarked on this pathway. They started collecting various artifacts. They had conversations with protesters. They tried to understand why different people took to the streets and why different people were present on the Maidan. So basically, they started collecting both material and non-material testimonies. When the Revolution of Dignity was over, those museum experts who initiated the Maidan Museum or the Freedom Museum continued their gatherings later. And during these gatherings, they tried to understand whether there was a need for establishing a tangible museum in the form of a building, and if yes, what kind of museum it should be. The next slide, please. While discussing and exploring the acquired experiences and having over 1,000 artifacts collected, they launched a number of projects and initiatives that later became a foundation for the establishment of the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity. So officially, this museum as an institution was set up in 2016. Later, the expert community tried to explore the needs of the society. So they were basically guided by the needs of the society. Some international contests and competitions were conducted. For example, Terra Dignitas, the territory of dignity. And as a result, we have the memorial complex of the Revolution of Dignity and the Maidan Museum. If you have a look at the next slide, you will see a really beautiful building. This is what the future museum of the Revolution of Dignity should look like. As of now, we don't have our own building. So we don't really have a museum facility as such. It does create certain inconveniences for our activities. Nonetheless, we are very proactive, we are engaged, and we are very visible in the museum sector in Ukraine. We employ different platforms, like, for example, the Gallery of Prosted Arts in Kyiv and some other institutions. We are actively cooperating with our partners in different Ukrainian cities. And there we actively engage in research and development, educational activities. I'm in the process of putting together a quarterly report, and in the last 3 months, we have conducted at least 18 exhibitions, 3 brand new ones. We also put together roadshows in order to interact with local communities and have some leverage among younger generations. We also hold educational lectures and awareness raising workshops. During these events, we present our knowledge and expertise. We make a showcase of the acquired experience. And as part of our activities, we also devise and elaborate educational and outreach resources and materials to mark the Dignity and Freedom Day, the 21st of November, and the Day of the Heavenly 100 Heroes, which is celebrated on the 20th of February. So my point here is that we bend over backwards to have a proactive stance, to be actively engaged, and our museum is a combination of both museum and memorial components. The next slide, please. As I have already referenced, we don't have our own building, and as a result, we are a sort of open platform, open space to promote the idea of democracy, to influence the development of the democratic society in Ukraine. And as part of our activities, we instill the ideas of dignity, freedom, and democracy in the emerging generations, because we believe that it's important for our citizens to stand for their civic rights and freedoms. So let me sum up my presentation. The Museum of the Revolution of Dignity utilizes its own and partner platforms in Kyiv, Ukraine, and globally to engage in cultural, educational, exhibition, and research and development activities. We are always open to any contacts and partnerships with institutions globally, because we want to be part and parcel of any processes that pertain to the upbringing of new generations. And we are ready to share some of the accomplishments that we have already achieved in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and I really hope that I made it within the allotted time.
That was perfect. Thank you for the nice start for this discussion. And you outlined very many important aspects to discuss. We will now continue talking to other experts. I believe they have many things to comment about to respond to your presentation, and they could answer some questions. Please be reminded that the participants can also ask questions on the chat here in Zoom or on the Facebook page of this event, and also on the YouTube. And we will be collecting those questions and forward them to our experts. And let us start the discussion. We will introduce our today's experts who would be commenting on the questions. Lisa, please introduce Mr. McCullough. I will. I'm very happy to have at this international webinar very interesting experts. Mykola Skiba is one of them. He is the director of the NGO Agency of Cultural Strategies. He is a well-known educational expert at the Institute of Future Ukrainian Institute. The floor is yours. We will start with a question to you. And the first question is, it is about the challenges that Ukrainian museums face today.
У мене просто трошечки зі сприйняттям, тому що
ми, можливо, розпочнемо з запитання до вас. І
We will start with a question to you.
Хотілося б вам поставити, це, власне,
I'm sorry, there is the overlapping of the same question.
про виклики, які постали зараз перед
So the question is about the challenges that Ukrainian museums face today.
у мене просто трошечки зі сприйняттям, тому що
Ми, можливо, розпочнемо з запитання до вас. І перше, яке я хотіла...
But this is the loop of the questions. I'm sorry, that's the same question.
Питання про виклики, які постали зараз перед українськими музеями.
я чую і переклад, і оригінальний звук, що ми спробую якось цим зарадити. Ні, напевно, мені варто, перезайти, тому що...
I'm sorry, I think this is my problem. I have some technical issues and I maybe should leave and get back because I think I can hear several people talking at the same time. I think this is the interpretation interfering. No, you can choose Ukrainian language only and then it would not interfere. Dear speakers, please be reminded to choose the language channel for interpretation access. And also that's important for the broadcast. If you're going to speak English, choose the relevant channel English. Mykola, you're welcome. The floor is yours. We can hear you very well. I am afraid there are some technical issues with Mykola. Maybe Tatiana will join. Tatiana, are you with us? As far as I understand, I am. I am with you. Perfect. Can you hear me? Is it better this way? Yes, Mykola is also back with us. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. So the question was about the challenges that Ukrainian museums face today. Well, there is the plethora of challenges, I have to admit, because museums failed to become the full-fledged institutions. I'm sorry, some window randomly started. So the problem is that museums in Ukraine, they have not yet become the full-fledged institution. What do I mean by that? I would try to explain the difference between the culture institutions and the other entity. Institution is something that was born from an initiative, and later they manifest their objective, their unique mission, and they have certain autonomy in contrast to the um, culture organization, culture institute. Museums, they used to be the instrument of propaganda in the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, Ukraine is now living with that legacy, and we inherited this attitude and this system. For 31 years, it has been there. When museums cannot dispose of their resources, they cannot engage their resources. Also, they do not have the direct say about the staffing policy. So the situation that is typical about the Museum of the Maidan is basically what it is. There was an initiative. The participants of the Revolution of Dignity, they initiated that idea to have that museum. They collected the artifacts, etc., when the developments were still active. But what about the further stages? We lack this bridge between an initiative that was born and further step of getting access to the relevant resources. There is a gap between this stage when two museum initiatives brought their effort together, and they used to be like self-governing institutions, and then there was another stage, and when they became the official establishment, and there is a gap in between. So there is this gap, and we do not have it fully regulated and developed when we have an initiative first, and then when we have the established institution. For example, when they have to exercise their mission, to practice the freedom, to practice the self-organization that was born in the Maidan Revolution. We were thinking about that. We would think that this should be the space that would host the training sessions, the seminars, the master classes, that would sort of maintain that experience of self-organization and self-sufficiency. It's not just the memorial or a monument that is telling about certain episode in the history, but the continuing, ongoing living practices. So that it could illustrate this self-organization effort, and this museum could be like a hub that would motivate it. But we can see that the system of culture management is designed in a way that it loses many of these elements. For example, when they have to draft the statute, the organizational structure, also the mechanisms of accessing the resources. So this is a major challenge that is lingering also on the level of the education. When we talk about the status of universities in the culture area, it's about the status of museums, which imposes many restrictions on the unfolding of the potential. The second challenge is related to people. Well, the situation in Ukraine is that people who have enough expertise and ambitions and expectations, they will come to the system of culture, to museums, but very often they only start their careers there. It's the launch of their career. But since there's few resources in the culture field, well, it's also related to the status of culture and the attitude in the society. These people, these experts, will go for more opportunities. Some of them will be forced to do this. Others will make this conscious decision and they shift to other industries, to other sectors. So when this period of transition between the young newbie full of enthusiasm and expertise, they will transform into a person panicking about survival, etc. So we're losing many people. Few people stay. So that's the another challenge, right? The human potential. It's also the consequence or repercussion of a structural issue. And I have already shared it previously many times about the attitude to culture, how culture is treated by politicians, how culture is treated by the um, owners of major resources. Usually these are the business owners, etc. So, and we need to address this. We need to raise awareness about that, to change the role of culture, to change the attitude to culture. And this role should be changed from the simple identity management or identity building to something bigger, like the area of human development, the area of social cohesion. Because after the revolution of dignity, many initiatives focusing on the reform popped up. For example, there was a group, I was a member of it, and they tried to change the policymaking in culture. It was called the Platform of Strategic Initiatives Culture 2025. So we really tackled the challenge of changing the strategy for the development of culture. We started with a vision, with describing the problems, and then we had this meme even, because culture with us is between the circus and actually the mausoleum, and that's basically it. This is the situation. The culture from this high pedestal um, is broadcasting some important messages, and on the other hand, it is supposed to entertain. What about the inside? This is the awareness raising education, where the museums and schools shall cooperate, where a museum will be the opportunity for the school to go beyond their walls and get into another space, to a different space, and try other practices like the research practices, exploration practices. When I was studying the civic education and the public education in the context of museums, and I can have the example from the UK and from the time of the First World War. They had this initiative when they engaged over 200 schools, over 4 million pupils. To research and study the former battlefields from the First World War. This included certain tours, field trips, archive studies, etc. And this offers the huge potential to the museums eventually, when we present culture as the field for growth, for development, not only sharing the messages, displaying the messages and storing them, but entertainment is not also is not the must either. But this is something that should be the core, that helps grow the personal potential. And I believe other institutions also face these challenges in the area of culture, but museums face this challenge in the first place because they are very material, the same as theater, for example. But museum is even more tangible, is more material, because I mean, in the good sense, they are burdened with the holding stocks. They are attached to the location where the museum was started. It's material, tangible, because it's also about the security system and modern day and contemporary displays and exhibitions require many things. Well, I'm sorry, McCall, I will have to interfere and interrupt you on that point. Well, thank you for your opinion, for an important position raised about the challenges that present-day museums face. And I would also like to introduce another expert that we have here with us. This is Tatiana Sheptytska. She is the Deputy Director for Academic Work at the Memorial Facility for Bukovinian Tombs. And she is also the candidate of pedagogy. Thank you, dear colleagues, for inviting me, for organizing this webinar, because it's an important platform to speak out about the critical issues and challenges that are of concern for us. I would like to build my a short input in consisting of two parts. First of all, we need to talk about the challenges that the museums face today. Also, the reserves also, for example, face similar challenges, because these are the places that combine cultural and art functions and research functions. And here I would like to separate, to divide my input into two sections. First of all, this is something related to what Mykola just described. It's about the access to resources, financial and human resources as well. And I will not repeat that, I just agree with that. And the second part of my input will mention the activities that we do, the exhibitions that we have, because the museum institutions such as your museum or our Reserve Museum, we work with the troubled history, the chapters of contested history. And this is something which is called by researchers the collective trauma. I'm not sure whether I could call us the unique place, because each of us has the unique trauma, obviously, like people who died during the Revolution of Dignity, the people who died during the Holodomor famine or during the repressions. But we all have to overcome important organizational challenges, because when you have the memorial place in the format that the government believes is important to have to commemorate the victims of political repressions, but we do not have the infrastructure, we do not have the exhibition areas that would allow to tell the stories to people about those who, yes, who are staying in those tombs that we are commemorating. Yes, of course, we are trying to use various possible formats and video online, etc. But another important aspect is related to how you work with the collective trauma. The coping with collective trauma starts with processing it, embracing it, and the ability and skills to share your pain and to deeply reflect on that trauma. And we can see the situation when people would traumatically respond to the Holodomor topics, but at the same time, they were ready to share about them. And also, it's very difficult to get people talking. And very often we deal with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the repressed people, but they still find it very difficult to share the stories. It's not only the collective trauma, but it's also the durable trauma, because the government did their best, to blur that topic in the collective memory, in the national collective memory, and to really cover it. So as a result, we need to do the following things. First of all, we needed to articulate the names, to really call the names, even though we have not explored all of the names yet. And also somehow to make the family members of the repressed victims not to be afraid to talk, to come to our museum place at least once or two times a year on the Memory Day, which is the national commemoration day, and we have various activities and events. Most often they would only come on the day when that political repression victim was executed. And then we need to try to integrate the memory and the information that we managed to collect into what we call the collective memory. And to be completely objective, we actually managed to do it properly only after 2015, when the package of laws about dehumanization and disclosure of archives was passed, when the researchers eventually got the hold of all of these cases and archives, and when they managed to be able to talk about them. Also, we find it very important, and I believe you agree with that, where we need to work with certain symbols. And I could say that we as researchers, we are happy to be able to develop some sort of a system of rites and rituals related to various activities. Maybe it's not that ramified, but still, we managed to organize some conferences, some public discussions, and we realized that the society needs something more when working with contested history and with the traumatic chapters of history. First of all, oddly enough, but in our context, people very much want to hear the names of the executors of the NKVD, those people who were executing the repressions. And this motivation is not fully articulated by NGOs, by civil society, by journalists, because it's not only about calling the spade, you know, because our colleagues from the Institute of History, etc., they made those names public. They published the papers about them. But it's rather about the technology of the system, about how the totalitarian regime operated. And certainly they were just the executors, you know, who fulfilled the orders, but they were the integral part of this totalitarian regime in any case. And here, civil society, on the one hand, is a driver and an engine to all of these activities, but on the other hand, the emotional part really keeps them from being dissociated and trying to have a more objective approach, because we rather support the individual responsibility for the crimes. Well, at least the moral responsibility would be there on the people who were executing the repressions. But on the other hand, there is another demand from society. The society requests, and I know my colleagues confirm in other museums, it's about building a positive image, some sort of a positive case we need in the context of the survivors, for example, or when the story continues. Very often we get journalists and colleagues from similar institutions, and they ask, do you have any positive cases about Bukivnia place, which is our memorial place, or who had been talking about this before the independence, for example, because we have this strong wave and massive wave of public speeches and publications about the Holodomor famine. So we find it very difficult to work with this case, because in our context, we do not have the stories of survivors. We do not have the voices of survivors at all, because it's a different topic. The stories of family members of the repressed people are not always positive. They're not always inspiring, you know. And in addition to those 60s dissidents, we do not have any other names to speak about for the period until the end of the 1980s. But in any case, we are trying to find some things. At least in our experience, we have the activities about, for example, Arthur Lukovsky, who is a well-known US businessman who unfortunately passed away. But he is the family member of the repressed victim Josef Lukovsky, who is buried in our memorial. And in the 1980s, he was instrumental to raising this topic, to bringing it forward. So this is the case when individual tragedy becomes the element of the collective tragedy, but not only. This is also when how one individual with his action would transform it to something more global, like a wider, broader memory and the commemoration techniques. So the rituals that he established, they're still working, even though back in the 1990s, they were not taking like that.
We have a multitude of projects that are related to the dissidents from the 1960s, or their ideas of condemning communism as an ideology and some of the communism-related war crimes. We have to step up and refresh these topics. Otherwise, this pain that stays with the families of the repressed will be unresolved, and all the information and materials amassed will be turned not only into reflections, but we can use this material as a starting point for the civic sector and for some other institutions. Tatiana, I have a question. How can international partners help you and support you here? How can we rectify this situation? How can we be of benefit to the society, and how we can contribute to the healing of this collective trauma related to mass killings inter alia? As for me personally, there's something that would be of interest to me. Someone said that museum institutions should serve in the capacity of bridges between museums and schools. It would be very insightful for me to hear more from the colleagues how we can better engage schools in these processes. I'm not really sure about what it's like for you, but in our context, schools are not very cooperative. So it's not that easy to invite the school children on excursions, and our lecturers are not invited. We don't really want to hear about that because this is very painful. Our children are not really ready to be exposed to that, even though all these topics are part and parcel of the school curriculum. Well, I'm really sorry for stepping on your words, but we are short on time. So to the best of my understanding, you are in need of mostly methodological and pedagogical guidance to establish better cooperation with schools. Thank you very much for that. And now back to my co-moderator, Irina. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Mykola. Very insightful reflections, the restoration of justice, transformation of trauma, some inspirational examples and showcases that we can utilize to get entry into schools. And now I want to give the floor to our next speaker, Ms. Lucia Koch. She represents the Polin Museum in Warsaw, and she will make a presentation about the role of museums in educational activities and how we can use them to transform societal memory. So she will tell us more about how their museum cooperates with schools. Lucia is a director of strategic programs, and she's also a person responsible for education. She basically initiated and developed the education section within the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews. And for a long time, she was a board member of the European Association of Museums of the History of Polish Jews, or Jews in general. So the Polin Museum is a unique museum indeed. It received a number of prestigious awards, and in 2016, it was granted the title of the European Museum of the Year Award. I guess that's it. Lucia, I know that you are ready. So over to you.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. And now I will try to share my screen and to start the presentation. So please be patient with me. I think I'm not doing it correctly, sorry. No, I think I'm not. And now, do you see it? No. No.
We cannot see anything, unfortunately.
Do you see me? No.
We can see you, but we cannot see your presentation.
Okay, just a second. Please give me a moment here. Okay, I have the presentation now. And the slideshow. Okay, can you see it? No?
Yeah, just make sure that it's full screen.
Okay.
Or
No?
maybe slideshow.
Yes, slideshow.
Now it's
Is this
great.
okay? Yes.
Now it's
Yes?
great.
Okay. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction to Polin Museum, as it's situated in the center of Warsaw. We opened it in 2014. I mean, the building in 2013. And it's located in what was once predominantly Jewish quarter before World War II, and was turned by the Germans into the ghetto, the Warsaw Ghetto, the biggest ghetto in Europe, and then to rubble. So the whole neighborhood was built after World War II on rubble. And the museum stands in front of the monument to the heroes of Warsaw Ghetto. And we like to say that it completes the memorial complex, as the monument commemorates how Jews died, and the museum celebrates 1,000 years of their history in Poland, on the Polish lands. And the core exhibition is the heart of the museum. And forms of education that we do in the core exhibition are mostly workshops. We try to conduct for schools, also guided tours. We try to combine historical education and civic education in our educational activities. And we have around 70,000 school children come to the museum or have workshops online a year during the pandemic. So the main goals of the museum is to preserve and popularize the heritage of Polish Jews, counter anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and foster understanding and respect for other cultures and religions. But I took the liberty of not speaking about the impact of the museum, but since my theme was the shaping the education and museum in shaping national memory, I wanted to talk about the socio-educational campaign that we have been doing for 10 years at the museum, which is one of the biggest campaigns now in Poland. And its main goal and purpose is shaping the national memory. So we started this campaign with this goal in mind. And the idea for the campaign came in 2013 when we were opening the building of the museum, but we still didn't have the exhibition. And we were opening it on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And the idea came from a girl who worked actually at the reception at the museum. And she was inspired by a campaign that there is in Great Britain of a poppy flower to commemorate World War I. And she said, well, you know, the last surviving leader of the ghetto uprising, the only one left in Poland in the 1980s, Marek Edelman, every year on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, he received yellow flowers from an anonymous sender. And he came to the monument, and there were no official commemorations then, and he laid those flowers with some friends. They were usually daffodils. So this girl said, well, let's make those, you know, paper daffodils, and let's distribute them in the streets. And in this way, let's, you know, commemorate the heroes, but also let's, you know, do something about how people remember the uprising, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, because in Poland, mostly people remembered the Warsaw uprising. And that's what they felt was, you know, their uprising, not the ghetto uprising, which that's at least what we felt. And so we started in 2013 with 500 volunteers and 50,000 yellow paper daffodils and 10 schools. And thanks mostly to the support of Norway grants and thanks to the consequent work. We had 3,000 volunteers this year. We had almost 500,000 of paper daffodils, and 7,000 schools and libraries from all over Poland joined. So this campaign really became national. It's very, very present all over Poland. When you come to Poland on April 19, you will see the daffodil everywhere. Especially in Warsaw, you will see all passerby wearing daffodils. You will see it on the, the president of Warsaw distributing daffodils. It is it's on the presidential palace. It is a very present campaign. We trying to reach youth. We have ambassadors of the campaign who are usually celebrities and famous people. So we try to get ambassadors that are important to young people. It's all over the media, including this year. It was even entertainment, breakfast, lifestyle programs, internet sites, tabloids. Actually, the campaign is very, very present everywhere. Big online reach with 66 million reactions, whatever, but it's very with also present in the European Parliament with the members of the European Parliament wearing the daffodils. So what we noticed with this campaign is that it's very unifying. When we did research on the internet and the impact of the campaign on the internet, we noticed that on social media, there's practically no hate speech around the campaign, which usually in Poland around Jewish topics, there's a lot of hate speech. And it is valued by both right-wing and left-wing internet users, but for different reasons. The left-wing value humanity and dignity, and the right-wing value heroism, sacrifice, suffering, and courage of the fighters of the ghetto. But the universal value is freedom, and that's unifying for all. So, but it wasn't like that from the start. One of the biggest steps for us in reaching schools was to change the narrative. And I will show later that we were not very successful in that, because we noticed in the first campaigns that schools that started participating in the campaign, they did projects about local heroes who helped Jews, or anyone who remembered Jews and how Paul saved Jews. And obviously the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is not about Paul saving Jews. So what we did, we started to produce a lot of educational materials from schools for all educational levels, because firstly, we didn't want primary schools, as this is a traumatic story of the Warsaw Ghetto, but they just participated. So we had to answer that. So we started producing stories, audio stories, films. And now the campaign is it's, I think, probably the biggest campaign in Polish schools, with 18% of pupils in Poland participating in schools and many more in cultural institutions, and a total of almost 1 million school students using the materials. So you can see how in recent years it just went up. Obviously, also thanks to the funding we have received. But what we do, we measure very accurately what schools use, how many % of teachers use what. So we adjust the materials to the school needs. And well, they appreciate that, obviously, that's why they use them. But all this effort, all this work, and I just wanted to show you a recent study. This study was conducted by a Polish government survey agency in March this year on a representative sample of all Poles. And it's like a representative study about the knowledge of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and its significance for Polish people. So stable, almost everyone in Poland knows about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and also it's very present in the memory in the collective memory of Poles. But the conviction that the uprising is important to Poles is getting stronger, although still most people think that it's more important to Jews than to Poles. But this percentage is dropped from 73 people who thought that it was important only to Jews to 60, to mostly to Jews, not only mostly to Jews, to 60%. And grew, radically by 15%, grew the percentage of Poles who think that the uprising, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, was important to them. And so, so I think that the very important factor here is that a lot more people think that this uprising is important to them personally. It grew from 28% to 36%. So in short, 90% of Poles have heard about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, but that was pretty much before we started the campaign. We strengthened the campaign during the time of the campaign, strengthens the feeling that this uprising is important to Poles, just as much, also to Poles. But also what grew is that Poles were heavily involved in helping Jews during the uprising. And this is something that I wanted to discuss because we put a lot of effort into showing the heroism and the suffering of Jews. And still, because of the narrative that is very present in Poland, that is the historical politics of Poland, that Poles massively helped Jews during World War II, since this is altogether in the media sphere, those convictions, they are together. Our efforts seem not to be, not to change much in the popular perception, in the national memory of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So yeah, on that sad point. But on the other hand, we changed the feeling. So as for the museum, it is important. It is one of our main goals that the Jewish history becomes the history of Poles, that it becomes close to their hearts. So this definitely, we can see that this is happening. On the other hand, well, the history is changed. So is it necessary? So that's my point for discussion. I don't know how to.
Lucia, thank you very much. We have some questions to you, but we will ask them a little bit later. I really hope that we will have some time left. Thank you very much for these staggering numbers, how you work with the schools, how you engage schools, how you succeed in reaching out to such a large audience. Your materials are amazing because we visit you from time to time. We are aware of your robust methodological and educational materials. And at this point, I would like to give the floor to two experts or discussants for some comments. And they will be able to make some comments on the topics and issues raised by Ms. Lucia Koch. The first expert or discussant is Ms. Alexandra Kozarov. Alexandra, are you here? Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Is everything fine? Alexandra is a coordinator of educational projects within the Ukrainian Helsinki Group for Human Rights. She's an educator, and she is also a board member of the Group for Human Rights. I have two questions to you, and there are also two questions from YouTube.
So the first, you as a teacher and a human rights lawyer, you work a lot with the human rights protection and also with the museums. What challenges do you see for this cooperation? How to enhance that cooperation? How to improve the curriculum for history in the Ukrainian schools, and also how to enhance the national memory work in schools in cooperation with the museums? I will probably provide the additional context for your answer through two questions. We have a question from a teacher, Ms. Petrova. She asks, we have the Museum of the Second World War registered at school. We are interested in the algorithm of how to change the name of the museum that we want to reformat. So that's a question that contributes to this discussion, how to establish this cooperation, interaction between museums and schools. And the second question we received from Svetlana Ovcharenko, she asks the question referring to the professor Vera Ageva. She said when taking a walk in the city center of Kiev, she counted 6 vacant pedestals. And that's the question. What do we do about these empty pedestals in a symbolic and literal sense? What should we place on these empty pedestals in lieu of the things that were dismantled from them? Thank you for these questions. And also, I would like to thank to the previous experts who were speaking and to Lucia in particular, because I will be referring a lot to what she said. And I, as a teacher of history and an expert of the history and civil education, I would like to reflect on that. And also, since the beginning of the war, not since 2014, but since 2018, I have been working with these topics related to the armed conflict in Ukraine. And to start with, I would like to have some background. I need to say that the historical identity showed that it is central between states and people, especially today. And historical identity has become the important tool for propaganda, and it had a major impact also on Ukrainian people over the past several years in this conflict, in this war that is raging. Museums have a critical role. It is a very important role that they have, because today we face the situation when we need to find the answer to the question why. Why has this happened? Why teachers of history, teachers of civil education, they have become collaborators with the enemy. So what failed? What is our role? What shall we change to never again have it? And of course, the role and activity of museums is very important in the process of the reintegration of the deoccupied territories. Of course, we understand that the day will come when we will have to sit down and build the new construct, a new structure of the historical and national memory. We will need to find the points of contact that will help us implement it. And also, as part of our organization, we are doing a lot in the area of transitional justice and the tools for transitional justice. This truth and truth thing, what shall be voiced? When shall this be said and articulated? This is one of the challenges that we need to tackle today. To be completely honest, from my history teaching experience, I can say, well, I had that experience that led to the huge transformation. As a historian, I understood the important role of museums. But as a teacher, I realized and saw how children are not interested in museums. These museum tours that the teachers do organize, sometimes for children, this is just a trial, an ordeal that they have to take, and that's it. But my attitude to museums has transformed a lot when I started going more to the museums, such as the museums of Jewish history, Yad Vashem, the Shoah Memorial, where they showed us how the museum space can actually work. And they shared the methodology with us. and it was really appealing. Then I visited the Museum of Occupation in Estonia. I really borrowed many things from their approaches. Another transformational experience for me was the cooperation with the National European History Teachers Association, and I am the trainer, certified trainer from them. They organized many projects, including the project which is called uh, we jointly share European history, something like that. And as part of this project, the colleagues from different European countries developed the strategies, like the universal tools that will be valid for the educational systems of different countries and that will be helpful to humanize the history for children, to make the history interesting for children, to get them interested for the children, because this is a challenge, an issue not only for Ukrainian school children, but also from other countries. So when I analyze this experience, I can deduce certain conclusions about what needs improvement. First of all, of course, we need to share and use the adapted experience, international experience, uh, which is plenty. There are many cases that we could borrow. For example, Euroclio, Historiana website, there is international history sources that are in open access, and my Ukrainian colleagues, and I can give you the long list of my colleagues, they are adding and contributing to these websites, and they are adding Ukrainian sources, and teachers from other countries can also use them for their lessons. And also, this is the possibility to present yourself in the international level and also to show the value of our history for Ukrainian children and Ukrainian teachers. These materials, this content includes strategies, the methods. So the Ukrainian experience is available. For example, in our organization, we had a project, this is called the Human Rights Lawyer Suitcases. It's about sharing the history through various subjects. Well, of course, we have the advanced museums and the representatives of museums present here. They are actually those people. But if we dig deeper, if we go to the margins, to the regions, if we go to the school-based museums, well, the passive story is prevailing there, just passive display. And I don't think it helps promote the role of museums so that children, school children in the first place, could understand why the museum is needed at all. So what impacted me when I visited those museums, you need to take the child from the consumer of information to the analyst and the somebody who makes the history happen. And museums shall be transformed to become more tactile when children could touch those things, get the hold of those things, to give them other channels of perceiving that information about those sources rather than just listening the story about them. And then secondly, if that's feasible, of course that needs to be done. But secondly, more commemorative practices must be used where the children could be the authors of the sources. And this might change their attitudes. They might get to understand that they also make the history happen. So we should try to change the approach. But in order to change the approach, we need to teach the teachers. And actually, the directors of the school-based museums, they are teachers. And sometimes they just lack experience. They lack understanding of how to implement things on the grounds. And also, I guess my time is running out, but to conclude, I would like to encourage the museums not to stay idle. Try to interfere try to engage more actively and work together with the authors of the history textbooks, for example. Because unfortunately, when we analyze the textbooks, the content, the sources on the internet, they are quite well known. But in order to show to the child that their regional history also matters, what we have in our museums is valuable and is significant, and this should be made accessible on a broader scale to the broader public. Because as of today, we have very few such cases, unique sources that need to be discussed when children will naturally get interested in those unique cases. But it's not only about the history of Ukrainian identity, but also about understanding that this could be happening next door. What is happening around me? So these specific examples and cases could help children rethink of who they are and what my role is in this system of coordinates in the Ukrainian, in the global context, something like that. Thank you very much. I try to be brief, but generally, there are so many museums that are already doing this. That's great, but let's think about what we can do and in the regions, on the grounds. And let me give another 5 cents. When we had the joint project with the schools from Luhansk in the east of Ukraine in 2019 and in 2020, then in school-based museums, well, this is the location in the gray zone of this Luhansk People's Republic. So we got into these museums and we saw so much Soviet stuff there. And the question, how to work with this? Probably this might have impacted the share of collaboration with the enemy that we have today in the temporarily occupied territories. Because of course you can use even the Stalin's portrait even today, but the question is how you address it, how you tackle it. What exactly are we trying to explain? What message should be there? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really need to reflect and respond as a person who works in the museum. You're absolutely right. And you raised very important issues about how the museum should engage with their audiences. Because indeed, today, the museums must take into account the needs of their target communities, target audiences, and this should be the mutually beneficial process for the new generation, for the children, I mean, and for the museum people. And in this regard, let me say the following. The Museum of the Revolution of Dignity is actually running many educational projects and awareness building projects, lessons, lectures, discussions, but also we are trying to build some interesting projects that will engage young people, children. For example, it's a very new project. It's the Terra Dignitas project. It's the augmented reality based project. Is about this Maidan events. It's just the pilot stage, and the stakeholders could still join. But this is to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity. By November 21, we will present this project to the general public, and 10 most important commemoration sites related to the Revolution of Dignity could be viewed through the QR code through your smartphone. You could see how those barricades looked like, how the Maidan used to look like, how this inner city in Kyiv looked like with the help of augmented reality. And I think the young people will find it exciting because they like this kind of stuff. So far, we only have 10 sites covered, but later we will add more because indeed everything related to Maidan as a phenomenon, Revolution of Dignity, there are many sites, not only in Kyiv, but also in other cities, the region capitals all over Ukraine. So this is to advertise our project, a disclaimer. And I would not steal the time from our next expert, and I would like to give the floor to Svetlana Osipchuk. She is director of the Museum of the War Childhood in Ukraine. The floor is yours. Please tell us answer the question very briefly and precisely. How generally Ukrainian museums and museums in general could contribute to the building of the national memory, and what do we need to have this traumatic history presented in a more, so to say, positive light for our school children, for example. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to participate in this event. Thank you, Lucia, for your presentation. I just wanted to say that my experience starts, I'm sorry, you muted. I was in Polian Museum in 2017, and I'm very happy to see how the museum and the project expanded and how popular it is among Polish people. To answer your question, Lesa, well, first I need to tell a couple of words about our museum because I don't think it's very popular and it's very well known to the general public. Well, we have worked in Ukraine since 2018, and our activity is based on documenting the experiences of the war, of the children of the war. We have several hundred of oral history testimonies. We use a certain fixed questionnaire. Of course, after the full-scale invasion, we changed the questionnaire, updated it several times. But when we started it in 2018, we have had the same focus. Changes brought by the war, changes entailed by the war. For example, how the school lessons change, how the schooling experience changed, extracurricular activities, how friendship looks like now when some people relocated and some children stayed. So we collected these archives, and when our researchers record the interviews, we have quite a big team now, 8 people working in different regions and in other countries. Along with the interview, we ask a child to give us an object that was related to the story the child shares, or generally the object which is related to this war routine for that child. And our collection now has about 500 artifacts. These are very different objects, such as, for example, the sponge they used to wash the dishes during the shelling in Marinka. Many books, of course, and different kinds of things, very mundane, everyday things. So one peculiarity of our work when we tell about the museums, both adults and children, because when we work with children, we need to have the consent of the adults. So they think of the war childhood, like very often they say, we didn't have the war childhood, because people would think about this like the tanks were on fire in front of their eyes, the bullets flying above their heads, lots of extreme experiences. Of course, it's also the legacy of the Second World War in the public space, right? All of these movies, Soviet movies and post-Soviet movies, they shape this image of the war, right? But when we get down to interviews, and turned out that the child stayed 10 days under the occupation when they really had horrible experiences living with the evacuation trains and convoys, etc. So these are different experiences. So we are documenting the war, and our public history projects are based on this content. And this also shapes our format cooperation with adults and with schools. Recently, we had the joint exhibition in Kiev with the Polish Institute, and it was about the experience of children who had to relocate abroad because of the war. We tried to present different aspects, various aspects of that. I just wanted to highlight this for you and to show how our activities look like. I want to illustrate it, so I would like to share with you the pictures.
So here you can see our exhibit. This is an item and the story related to it. And here you can see the description of this story. So I will just leave it on the screen so that you will be able to read. This is our third exhibition of this sort since the establishment of the museum as NGO. The first two exhibitions took place before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We also presented some of the items from our central office in Bosnia and Herzegovina because our museum is a branch of the museum that was established in 2017 in Sarajevo. And that museum was dedicated to the experience of the Bosnians in the 1990s during the war in that stretch. So their community is comprised of adult people that reflected some of the events that took place basically 30 years ago. Our primary community includes children, those children that are related to the ongoing war. So basically, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we interviewed children in Donetsk and Luhansk region and in the temporarily occupied Crimea. But right now we can collect testimonies from all over Ukraine because we don't really have a single region in our country that would not be impacted by the war. These stories vary and they're quite diverse. So I don't really want to say that they are targeted. And I would like to complement what Alexandra said and some other colleagues referred to as well. What is the focus of our museum? What is the essence of our educational activities? When we had this exhibition at the Polish Institute, something happened that came as a surprise to us as well. There was a great demand from schools. We have been inundated with requests. So we received a lot of requests from the bottom, from school teachers themselves. Can we take our children to this exhibition and things like that? Of course, we were open. And then we also had to align everything with the school management. And I would like to illustrate one episode when a school teacher wanted to take her children to this exhibition, but the school management did not give the green light because the school management, for whatever reason, thought that we present and exhibit only very difficult and complex history and experience. Well, I do understand that everyone is responsible for their children and they feel like protecting them or maybe shielding them from this experience. But I had several groups and I guided them around this exhibition, and I can see that it's a very positive experience because there's a lot of interest in schools in discussing the war-related experience. As a museum, our emphasis on the fact that children are active participants as well. They are agents as well. In times of war, they find themselves in extreme, dire circumstances. The adults, their parents, have to make quick decisions whether to move or not, so they do not really consult with their children. Nonetheless, children have an avid interest in finding their agency. They also want to have at least some impact on their community, on people surrounding them. We have multiple stories of children raising funds for the military, or for example, they collect donations to support their dads who are active service members. So children in Ukraine right now are trying really hard to understand how they can contribute to the society, how they can have an impact on what is happening. And with our museum, we have enormous experience, not only because of our headquarters in Sarajevo, we have our own archive, and we've been working with archives for a long time. By the way, it should be noted that we don't have our own building or our own facility. And because of that, we do not have exhibitions throughout the year, but we organize a lot of exhibitions both domestically and beyond. We want to have more exhibitions in Ukraine in the first place. We also implement a wide array of other projects. So for example, we offer workshops for adults because adults want to know how to discuss the topic of war with their children, how to help their children reflect on the experience of the war. We can see that the need is there. They need to talk about the complex and the challenging. And here I fully concur with the colleagues that museums are best positioned to talk about complex and challenging experiences because we have this database of collected testimonies. Some museums have written stories. We collect oral interviews and oral story materials. And now I'm ready to answer Lesa's question. How can we influence national memory? How can museums have an impact on national memory? As for such museums as ours, I believe that our stories and our testimonies can be very impactful. And we have already been exposed to multiple similar examples today because we can make national memory more inclusive. We have stories about complex experience or mutual aid and mutual support. Or like, for example, one story of a girl trying to flee from the town of Mariupol. We have some also stories and testimonies from the small towns and villages in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. These experiences must be incorporated into the national memory at various levels. We have to discuss them, we have to reflect on them, and in the future, we intend to implement educational projects to help children speak out about their stories, because a lot of these stories remain untold. Because basically, this is the foundation for our museum activities, and this is something that we can use to better process and explore this traumatic experience. For all those groups affected by traumatic experience, recognition is an important factor. I mean, legal acknowledgement comes to the forefront, of course, but we also need to create alternative spaces like museums where these different target groups can have their stories voiced, can feel that their experience does matter, is important, that it's accessible and available to other people, and that there is acceptance of this traumatic experience. I believe that in this regard, museums are promising platforms, and we can do a lot in this regard. Thank you very much for your reflections. Museums should engage local communities, should encourage them to be more present in all this work. And back to Irina, we are ready to transition to our last speaker. Colleagues, we are really behind the schedule. So in terms of timing, we're not really doing a good job, but we are discussing a lot of interesting and stimulating issues. And now we will talk about educational activities in museums for school children. We have Anna-Lena Anderson and her colleagues from the 22nd of July Center. It's a training and educational center. It works with stories about memory facilitation. It's about the knowledge of the acts of terror that happened in Oslo and Utoya Island on the 22nd of July. Our speaker is the head of the section of exhibitions at this museum, and Stina, her colleague, coordinates work and activities with witnesses. Colleagues, over to you. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. 2 seconds, just. Nej, det var bara den där. Sorry. Och så går vi fram. Do you see our presentation now?
Not yet.
No, okay. Hmm. Nej. Jo, det är den här. Ja, jag tänkte så. Eller, sorry. Nu är det i alla fall. Så det den och allt.
Now we can see it, but full screen, please.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. Hi, everyone. We can't see you now, but probably you can see us. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation to talk together in this fora and also for all the very good discussions. It's a pleasure to be here and to listen. My name is Stine, and I'm the head of education at the 22nd of July Center.
And my name is Anna-Lena Andersen, and I'm head of the collection at the center.
Yeah. And as you started just a few minutes ago, the 22nd of July Center is a memorial and learning center based in Oslo, close to where the first attack happened on the 22nd of July in the government quarter. And we don't have that much time to talk, so when we thought about how to talk about addressing controversial issues in the museum's educational activities, we will talk mostly about the center's annual school competition, both as a concrete example of how to work with controversial issues, but also as a tool to better understand what pupils and students and teachers need, what their interests are, and how we as a memorial and learning center can guide them in how to talk about controversial issues like the 22nd of July and other events in their contemporary history and present lives, just like someone mentioned just before we had the word here. Yeah, so I just have to get my script because now we have another presentation, a PDF. But shortly and first, last year, the center welcomed 12,500 pupils, teachers, and others who took part in one of our teaching programs. And in 2020, the terror attack, 22nd of July, was integrated as a topic to teach about in the national curriculum. So that means that every teacher, every pupil should receive education about the terror attack of the 22nd of July within a frame of democracy. So when we had the 10-year commemoration of the 22nd of July, we decided that we wanted to launch a school competition just to see how can we get teachers to teach about the 22nd of July in the classroom with some guidance from us, but also to find out what are the pupils interested in, what are their takes on the 22nd of July. And the reason why we wanted to do this is because we needed to see like how is the balance between the own memories that you have when you remember an attack like this, but also how do we teach about a topic that might be very controversial for adults and those with their own memories, but for pupils without, and it's quite different to learn about a topic. So we also have started with this is the third year that we had the school competition, and we also started some research with a faculty here in Oslo about what are the pupils answering in their school competitions, what are their interests, and also how do the teachers deal with this school competition. So we've interviewed teachers and also analyzed the pupils' contributions into the competition, not just the winners. So what we can see from the 3 years that we had this school competition is that the first year, the topic was what does the phrase "we will never forget" mean, and how do we make it more than just empty words? And then we saw that a lot of the response from pupils was roses, love, mostly girls. That's a little trend there. but also from the boys, very phasing into the exciting part. They have seen some films. They wanted to reenact that and show us that through a film. So there's some maybe we could call it easy ways to talking about the terror attack, the love or the scary, the excitement part. And then the second year of the school competition, we wanted pupils to contextualize the 22nd of July and racism. And we saw that this was a big challenge for teachers. We don't have enough research material to say if it's because it's hard to see the direct link, or if it's because I think a lot of teachers haven't really known how to teach about the 22nd of July. And then this year we had the topic of having the students and pupils themselves talk about what should we teach about the 22nd of July. We wanted them to make teaching programs, and we know that a lot of them also taught younger pupils at their schools, invited younger classes, and taught them about the 22nd of July. And what we see from these 3 school competitions is that there's a lot of focus on love, and also on the excitement of what a terror attack might be, because some of the pupils find it quite exciting to learn about. We also see that they individualize the terrorist a lot. So they are very focused on the terrorist, how did he become a terrorist, and they have quite simple ways to explain this. So it's often very, well, he had a bad childhood. So we see that they have some trouble lifting the topic of far-right extremism in general. And also we see that they also have some trouble contextualizing the 22nd of July. That they sometimes think it's like a simple, not a simple, but a single event that just happened, just accidentally happened in the Norwegian society and democracy. And that's something that we see is challenging when you want this topic to be something that they can relate to, that we can say this has something to do with you, with us, with our democracy, with our world, that some people believe that they can kill and hurt other people instead of using their words, acting democratically. So these challenges are quite obvious to us, but they also help us. So I think it was very exciting to learn about the not the school competition, but a way to use the flower to contextualize and talk about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and that was very interesting to hear. But we also see that we want to continue this school competition because we get so much information, and also not just for pupils, but also to how to help teachers, because through the interviews and through the contributions from the pupils, we see what we need to work more on and how we can help them. So it's in many ways a challenge because it has something to do with our national memory. I started thinking about that in the previous talk here, and yeah, how can we make the 22nd of July a part of everyone's national memory and still have the facts present? How can we make it relevant for pupils, but also people who have moved on in a way, who are not directly affected? Yeah. So Anna-Lena, she will talk a little bit more about how we think, or one way of doing this.
Yes. So as Stina mentioned, we work closely with how to make this relevant for pupils and of course for the general public. And one way we are working with with this is objects and authentic objects from terror attack as 22nd of July as we all know, very valuable and entry points to learn about and commemorate the terror attack, and to understand more the causes and the consequences of the attack. We also see that it's important to use objects as elements to counteracting the emerge of conspiracy theories and alternatives understanding of what happened on the 22nd of July. And our objects have two different qualities. Of course, the material one, the physical quality, but also the intangible, the human quality. And we use the objects, like, of course, as an object, but it's very important for us to always contextualize the object. And this summer, the 22nd of July Center, we conducted a survey, a quest back for pupils, but also the general public. And one of the many interesting results we got back was the interest our visitors has in objects. And they highlighted the objects as a positive element. And Stine can tell much more about this, but you can also see that in your educational work, that students, they really attract to the objects. And we think that's because it's a concretizing. Yeah. The abstract of what the terror attack is about. So the object is suitable for everyone, is open to interpretation, and it's a conversation starter. And you can see when we meet people in the exhibition how the different kind of objects lead to different conversations. Yeah. And we have a very interesting example of this from France, actually. For 2 weeks ago, Stine and I was invited to a school exhibition in Paris because a group of French students made this dress, as you can see in the picture, to commemorate the victims after the July 22nd. And hopefully you can see it, but the flowers, they represent people who was hurt in the government quarter and at the island of Utøya. And it might be hard to see, but it's a small pearls on the
the bottom of the dress. How do we say that in English? I don't know.
And it's 77 in total, and they commemorate those that died that day, and also it's a symbolic of the tears that fell after the terror attack. Yeah. And it's very interesting in many ways. And one of the very interesting part is that these students, they have read and studied 22nd of July, and they got the number of victims correctly, and they have both sides of the terror attack. And we can see in the Norwegian narrative that often the terror attack here in the government quarter are forgotten, and that was very it was very emotional for us to see that those these students in France, they actually managed to remember both sides of the attack. Yeah. And we talk a lot with the students, and we was of course very interested in why they chosen to commemorate July 22nd, especially since France has suffered so many terrorist attacks. And the students, they told us that when they learned about the 22nd of July, they realized that terror and the consequences of terror is universal. This dress will play an important part for us in our work later on. And we want to show it to you as an example for how museum can work across borders and how we can work together and highlight the important topics and show the links between terror attacks and war around the globe, and hopefully we will manage to loan it to here to in Norway, so we can also show this dress and of course the context around it and the stories that's are a part of this piece to the Norwegian community.
Yeah. And I can also add that I didn't say that earlier, but in our school competition, we also see that a lot of pupils are missing the first attack that happened. And we also have a lot of visitors and also pupils saying that they believe or they've heard that the first attack on the 22nd of July was a diversion to do the original attack that was on Utøya. But we know that we have to talk about these things, and it's also a very it's a challenging matter, I think, for all museums. Like how do how is the national memory? How do we commemorate? Which words do we use? And how do we help each other to show exactly what these people said, that terror is universal. It's painful no matter where you live. It's a threat to our democracy. And with the ongoing war in Ukraine and also the recent events in Palestine and Israel, it's also important to be open to discussions and dialogue. And that's something that you can do through objects, because it's easier to ask a question about an object and it's easier to start a dialogue. Because if we have one object like this dress, what does this tell us about the 22nd of July? Well, it tells us that it's universal because someone else who's also suffered, comes from a country who suffered a lot of terror attacks, more than Norway, wants to educate themselves and learn about it, because it's not something different. And what we didn't mention also, I think it will be a good thing to say, is that it wasn't two of the flowers.
Yeah.
They have this shimmer. Yeah,
gold shimmer.
Yeah, to represent the victims from the Bataclan terror attack. Yeah. So they also included. Yeah.
And the reason that they included just one of the several terror attacks is from that event in November 2015 is because they met witnesses in the class and get to know one of the survivors from that attack.
Yeah.
And they did see the connection between that terror attack and what happened here in Oslo and Utøya.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what we have today. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your input. And now we shall continue the discussion. Well, and I would like to invite Christina Troszak to join the discussion. She is the PhD, the chair of the Department of Educational Policy of the Lviv Institute of Postgraduate Education, and she is also the coordinator of the European Vergeland Center. She's also the trainer, and she has been dealing with these aspects for several years, involving the cooperation with Norway and Poland. So what about the Ukrainian school curricula? Do they include the contested aspects of history a lot? And also, how could museums help teachers get the skills to discuss these contested topics of history in the classroom? But also not only from history, of course. Thank you for your question. I would also like to start with thanking the organizers and also representatives of the Museum of the Revolution of Dignity and the Vergeland Center as organizers of this event. And I hope this is the beginning to build the bridges of cooperation between education and museum worlds. I can see that my internet connection is not stable, but I hope you heard what I said. But, well, I think that this conversation is not a common conversation, because on the one hand, we have the war in Ukraine. I will talk more about the Ukrainian context, obviously, but also this war in Ukraine caused a lot of suffering and horrors. But on the other hand, it is a chance for us to rethink and to comprehend in a different way certain things that we have been doing in our respective areas. And from what I see, the museums, Ukrainian museums, are changing their attitudes and approaches to their work. On the one hand, the attitudes are changing about the role of museums in society, and also we are changing the attitude about who and why shall be commemorated. So on the one hand, it's a technical question that was similar to what one of the teachers asked, how do we change the name of the museum, right? But also we can see the change of the attitude and role of Ukrainian museum people to artifacts, how to deal with them. But also parallel to the war, we have the reform of the secondary school education, and the new Ukrainian school encourages the education of new younger generation of Ukrainian citizens as co-authors of change, not just the passive consumers of information. So this entails certain changes in museum area and also in the schools. And I think this is where we could rely on the experience of our colleagues from Norway and also from Poland Museum. I am part of the generation who used to like to go to museums and really like visiting museums, to be completely frank. But I really was uh, surprised and overwhelmed to be in the museums outside Ukraine. I remember my first visits that were really overwhelming for me. It's not about the most beautiful objects that need to be displayed. It's about the objects that deserve thinking and comprehension, that help build the narratives. And it's important to have the museums that invite you to join, to engage, to cooperate. I think for the younger generation, it's critical. When you can actually participate and contribute to the comprehension of certain aspects. Museums that do not only impose one line which is most correct as a narrative, but they pose questions. And in this regard, this fluidity of things should be presented in the museum, the multiplicity of things. And I think for Ukrainian museum, this is something that we still need to tackle on different levels. So when the discussion of the contested aspects is actually very much related to this question. When I started working with the teachers on a more regular basis, I realized that teachers are really trying to avoid discussing some questions for different reasons. On the one hand, we encourage schools to have debates and discussions about certain issues, but at the same time, very often, this is the area, the field where few teachers are interested to participate. They would rather deal with some social aspects, organizational stuff, which is not part of the curriculum and training process. And I think these processes should run in parallel. And in different fields, we should understand that the discussion of contested aspects is critical, is very important. Many colleagues have mentioned this today. They said that there was this contested topic exhibition. Teachers were afraid to go there. They didn't want to, have their children face certain issues and problems. So they didn't really, that's why there were a few visitors at such exhibitions. But why I like the approach of Norway? Because I actually visited this exhibition of 22 of July. And also we talked to the museum people from Norway via the Wergeland Center. We understand that avoiding contested issues doesn't eliminate them. When we talk to children about the painful and contested questions in a school, when we don't talk about them at school with children, it doesn't mean that the problems disappear. They will face them elsewhere. That means that children will have to find the answers themselves. They will have to cope and to face them themselves. And children and adolescents are not offered by us adults any tools to cope with those contested aspects. Of course, there are methods available. Other colleagues have already developed the coping mechanisms and tools and maybe approaches and methods how to discuss these questions in the school settings. But I think that when we go beyond the classroom, when we can go to exhibitions, to museums, this would only help have this conversation about the contested aspects, which unfortunately are plenty. And with time, we will have even more of these problematic contested questions. The problem will not disappear. And Tatiana mentioned this in her presentation to confirm this. Thank you very much for your brief reflection. And from what we can deduce from your input is that we need to engage both stakeholders. So educators and museums need to cooperate with each other, voicing their needs. Museums would actually respond and help build the bridges between themselves. I'm really sorry to interrupt because we are really late with the agenda, but I need to introduce to you another expert that we have. It's Nadia Vasilishin. She is the manager, project manager in the Memorial Museum of Totalitarian Regimes, the Territory of Terror. And Nadia, please be brief, but we need to listen to you anyway. Please answer the important question. In your opinion, well, how do you work with the school educational programs, and what challenges do you face in sharing these in the curriculum that are imposed for your audiences? Well, our museum is focusing on two occupation regimes, the Nazi regime and the Soviet regime. When we talk about working with children, well, these are mostly like the high school pupils, right? Because why would they be of this age? Because they have it on their curricular, this topic. So it's easier for us to talk with this age of 10th and 11th grade. Unfortunately, our children had to become adults too soon. So we talk to them on equal terms as with adults. But this window of empathy with children who are experiencing their own trauma is very narrow. So when we start talking about the Nazi occupation, about the Jewish experience, what they actually are puzzled, they face this fact that we are in the center of evil and we are fighting the evil that came down from the Soviet Union, but there are also other people that you need to express empathy about in the history and learn about them. Well, that's that. That was brief, wasn't it? But in fact, in our museum, we still have another exhibition hall where we talk about the beginning of the Second World War. And the children, for example, a child learns about the Second World War when they burst into their apartment, they break the windows and start shooting back. And this is the room where children start talking about the present day events that we face today. It's very important not to re-traumatize children, and not only children, but because our excursions start with the adolescents rather. So our museums, they have the visitors who can hear these stories because we have this audio materials. You can touch everything which can be touched, everything that is scanned, and they can feel this history. They feel they are part of this history because it continues. And actually, we can see this confirmed in our feedback book, and the children write this in their handwriting of a child, right?
Some researchers from international organizations offered a course because they elaborated a separate methodology for how to work with children on trauma, but we realized that it doesn't really fit our context. They wanted to gamify our history. They wanted to incorporate some children's positive experience. For example, a train, because you are going to the seaside on holidays, or like apples and things like that. But for our children, a train is not really associated with something childish or with holidays. Or it's the same with all the resettlement and relocation stories. So you cannot really include the symbol of a train as something positive or something childish. So we realized that we still have to hammer at this rock. We, of course, are interested in acquiring some experience and expertise from abroad, but considering the fact that we are in the midst of this experience, we are part and parcel of the ongoing context. We need to come up with new concepts, languages, or language and forms. Thank you very much, Nadia. On behalf of the webinar organizers, I would like to extend my profuse gratitude to all our speakers, to all the participants, to everyone who asked questions and made comments. I'm really hopeful that today we have been able to reflect on some of the issues and challenges faced by museum experts and educators. We still have a number of challenges to overcome in the future. I will make an attempt to summarize what has been said. To the best of my understanding, international colleagues have amassed their own experience, but we cannot always employ it in our context. Because it does not always fit our setting. So there's a need for further discussions. There's another thing that we need to understand. Over the past 100 years, we have accumulated multiple traumas. So it's like one trauma on top of another. And we need to find the right balance between how we can make this trauma more positive, but at the same time, we need to actively engage in the processing and discussion of this trauma, polytrauma. We must be very honest and forthcoming while having discussions about trauma. And we should not be afraid of being more active or even proactive in seeking to identify the needs of our audience. Maybe Irina wants to add something. Maybe there are some brief comments from our speakers and the discussants present here. On my personal behalf, let me say a big thank you to all of you once again. Thank you for having contributed to our webinar today. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Lesa. I really hope that this is not the last webinar that we have organized together, because we brought together a neat group of experts here. As we can see, there are multiple issues on the table that require our discussion and reflection. So I really hope for continued cooperation. Would anyone else like to say some brief comments to finish it off? But we are really behind the schedule, so we don't really want to keep you here any longer. Thank you very much, everyone. All the best to all of you. A big thank you to our viewers, to our listeners, to our participants. Thank you very much. Take care of yourselves and have a peaceful and